Is there anything else at Lightshade that you find very unique or maybe ahead of its time as far as sustainability?
Yeah, we touched on this a little bit before the conversation here, but with LEDs, that's something that we've been doing. So we're in a larger context with electrical usage. We're part of Xcel Energy's Strategic Energy Management Program, and so basically, what we did in signing on with that is something that's available to big commercial clients. Is they assign a kind of resource. Analytics-based consultant who looks at your overall usage and identifies ways that you can maybe make things more efficient or save, and then it opens you up to some good rebate opportunities. And so as part of that program, we went through the process of pulling out all of our HPS lighting in the greenhouse and then also our indoor grows and replacing it with LED. And when we did that, we dropped our electrical usage a bit. It was about a, 20% reduction at the greenhouse and then a 10% reduction at the indoor facilities. But we also upped our lighting intensity by quite a bit. So in the indoor facilities, we went from around 850 micromoles instantaneous to about 1200. Or in terms of DLI, we're like kind of in the mid 30s up into the 50s. And then at the greenhouse, the initial lighting plan there with just HPS was way lower than we needed to be. And so it was done there in kind of a number of phases. First, we added some LEDs to supplement the HPS. And then a year later, we went through and as part of this whole process in 2021, when we were retrofitting the indoors, pulled out the rest of the HPS and added more LED. And so that got us to the point where at the greenhouse with our lighting coming from outside as well, in the winter, we're kind of in the high 30s. And then in the summer, we can be, like 50 plus as far as the DLI goes. And so what we were able to do is reduce our energy consumption a little bit, but increase the efficiency a lot because we're getting more yield out of those spaces per unit area than we were before because we've upped the lighting intensity, and that was one of the limiting factors. So I think, if people are thinking about LEDs, that would be one of the big things that I would say is like, look at what you can accomplish in terms of production goals and efficiency, not just energy savings, because doing a one-to-one kind of watt-to-watt LED swap is sometimes a lot better way to go than just a fixture-to-fixture thing. So you can be using a similar amount of energy, but producing a lot more.
And did you notice like a lower cooling load when you switched to LEDs?
Yeah, so in the greenhouse, it made a big difference for us because we were not really like frying the tops of the plants the way we would sometimes during the summer, because summers in Colorado's, we have some days that get really hot. And so even with the pad wall cooling and everything else going, we were still having trouble holding temperature. So we've seen that our average kind of summer day temperature, now we're able to hold around like 82 or so in the greenhouse. And when it was HPS in the months of like July, August, and then kind of into September, we would have been more around like 87, 88 without doing any sort of dimming. And so that was tough. And then in the indoor grows, their HVAC was kind of undersized, especially in one case. And so going to LED really helped us to hold better parameters. So basically less swings of the environment. You don't have the huge swing in temperature and humidity that's associated with turning on and off HPS lights. And then during the really hot summer months, we were able to hold temperature better. So it's been great as far as that goes.
That's awesome. I said that you had mentioned dimming, so you went with an LED fixture that you're able to dim,
Yeah,
which also,
definitely.
right?
Yeah, so we have at the indoor grows, actually, we kind of, as things are turning on and off, we'll dim down and dim up. And then we also dim at the beginning of the cycle where the plants don't need quite as much light and they're adjusting. And then at the greenhouse, we have that dimming capability as well, although we don't intend to use it at all really, except for maybe peak summer months, just because that greenhouse, where one of the things we're looking at too is potentially changing the glazing material to get more lighting penetration. But it's not just the glazing, it's also that there's a lot of superstructure up there. And so we only get somewhere around a quarter to a third of the light that's outside actually making it to the canopy level. And so part of the LEDs there were just really getting the illumination values up and increasing production that way.
Well, we should talk more about that offline. Maybe we can help with the glazing.
Yeah, definitely.
As you know, materials that also can scatter the light with diffuse quality without lowering the light transmission. So
yeah, and that was, so the glazing material we have right now, because this greenhouse was, it took about 3-4 years to build, which was way longer than they thought. And we've been in operation for 2. And so the glazing material that was originally selected is a very high diffusion to the point where it kind of blocks some of the transmission. So I would say, as far as what we're talking about and it being helpful to somebody else listening, when you're looking at putting a greenhouse up, really look at the orientation of the greenhouse so that you're maximizing the amount of sunlight that's coming in, and then balancing the type of material that you are going to be glazing with against the crop. And so with cannabis, some degree of diffusion is nice so that you don't get a ton of shadowing and things are a little bit more even. But if you have too much diffusion, you're not going to get enough penetration. And this is a crop that really likes a lot of light. So that was something where if you're doing it all over again, we probably would have glazed with a different material. And when we reglaze it in a little bit here, we definitely will.
awesome. Well, that leads me perfectly into the next question I had for you, Dan, which is, what are some of the most common mistakes or misconceptions that you see in greenhouse cultivation with cannabis, either in the design and selection process or operationally?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. So I would say that, for us, definitely that the glazing material and then the level of superstructure and just planning around what we needed to do there. And so the mistake, though, was going into it without fully understanding those things and then not offsetting those issues by giving enough supplemental light. So we right now with the LEDs get an instantaneous amount of about 700 micromoles at canopy. And when it was originally designed with the HPSs that were in there, we were getting about 275, but then with a lot of uniformity issues. And so that was a big rate limiter for us on the production side. I think another thing to consider is that, what is your end goal in terms of cultivating in the greenhouse? And I know that you guys specialize in a variety of different options, and some of them are not pad wall cooled, which is something that can be really advantageous because when you're pad wall cooling, holding CO2 is tough, especially in the summer when you're having to run that a lot. And so that has been another rate limiter for us at the greenhouse when you compare it to our indoor production is, just holding CO2. And so knowing kind of your target, I think that there's definitely a place for even pad wall cool greenhouse production if you've got a big enough range and you're going for more of like a biomass sort of situation. For us, if you're trying to produce kind of top tier flower, and you're stacking like a pad wall cooled greenhouse up against an indoor facility, there is definitely some challenges if you're on the greenhouse side in terms of the overall yield, just because of the holding CO2 and then the variability of the environment. Another thing to balance, because part of the reason we went with the greenhouse is thinking about it from a sustainability standpoint. And we have a much lower electrical footprint than we would have if we had gone, say, with an indoor grow. But our water usage in the summer, even with the recirculation, jumps up quite a bit when we're using the pad wall because it's a large greenhouse and you go through, a lot of water when you're doing pad wall cooling. And so if water is like the primary limiting factor where you're at, that might be another factor to look at with greenhouses. The last thing that I would say, and this is not really greenhouse specific, but just in a larger sense, the other thing that I would say is maybe a mistake on our situation is that the greenhouse was designed with a palletized benching system. And the thought process there is that it would make things better and more efficient because with palletized benching, you can move one individual bench anywhere within the greenhouse. So it's much different than rolling benching. But the unintended consequence of that is that even though we have a huge benefit from the harvest side because we have a harvest area in our head house and we can roll trays down there, do that. harvest everything, clean those trays, and cycle them back into the veg, fresh and ready to go. So from that side, it's really convenient. But when you're thinking about doing work out in the greenhouse in the flower areas, in order to do that, you have to cycle those benches onto a transport line. You can't just do it in place. And so it has been less efficient for us labor wise. And the palletized technology is really meant for crops that don't have as much hands-on needs as cannabis, and it also works a bit better if you're in like a much larger production situation. We're 30,000 square foot, a little less than an acre, and so I think we're just not quite big enough, and with the right crop to capture that. So I think if I had been involved in the overall design side, I would have gone with a more traditional rolling bench situation. Um, yeah, I'm trying to think that. Oh, the only other thing that I think was a mistake that we kind of made in the beginning that I'd bring up is uh, with the type of pad wall cool greenhouse that we have really big exhaust fans on the other side. So east side is the pad wall, west side is the exhaust fans. You're pulling things across, and if we had gone with VFD fans instead of direct drive, that would have been great because with VFD, you have less motor burnout because you're not cycling on and off. And then you also have more efficiency and it's better at holding the temperature bands. And the last thing is when they originally put everything in, for whatever reason, the greenhouse wasn't designed with gable fans. And that was a big mistake because it meant that we had hot air trapped up in the top of the houses. And then as you're running all your exhaust, it's also pulling that down. So we added gable fans after we were in operation, and that really helped us with just better climate control, especially during the summer.
That's amazing insight. And shows that you can retrofit things as you go along.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of that. Like, and I think that's one thing that I would just say is, to cultivators in general, is if you look at your facility and you're having limitations that are because of infrastructural issues, sit down and do an economic analysis of, what it would cost to change those infrastructural issues, what you project you would be able to gain in terms of benefits on the yield side is always a really good way to articulate those things. And then really kind of sit down and do the math on what the ROI on that would be. And if it makes sense, jump on that and do it. Don't just be limited by the problems of the building. Try to jump in there and fix them.
That's encouraging. What do you think is the best grow method when it comes to choosing a grow medium and selecting a nutrient program?
Yeah, so I mean, I can tell you what works well for us. I I would say that oftentimes people are looking at nutritional inputs in cannabis. So right now we use an expanded coconut core media that comes compressed, and then we add water and it expands into blocks that are kind of the set media, the amount that we want. The advantage of that is that you don't have to deal with any packing of pots or anything. You don't have as much variability in the compaction. Makes things really easy to kind of work with that way. And then the other thing is that we don't have to transplant because you can just cut the bottom off of the 1 gallon and put it directly on the 3 gallon. And then you've got your final amount there. And then we use a synthetic blend of nutrients that we just basically buy in raw salts, mix our own concentrate tanks, and then inject according to the ratios that we're looking for. And so that gives us a ton of control, and we're able to directly deliver what the plants need. That said, though, it's not an organic system because those are synthetic salts. And so if you wanted to be growing organically, you would have to take a totally different approach. And I think that the synthetic situation is sometimes harder for people to learn, but I would say easier to master because you can really control all of those inputs once you figure out how to do that. Whereas an organic system, in some ways can be a little bit more forgiving right off the bat, but is a lot harder to master because you've got complex, you're basically creating like a little ecosystem. inside your media, and then that's what's feeding your plants. And so there's a lot of variables there. And then let me think. So I think coconut coir generally as a media is a bit more forgiving than something like rock wool, because rock wool, while you can also have a ton of precision and control there, it dries out really fast. And if you have like a pump failure or something like that, you're going to have significant issues. And I also prefer this compressed core option to say like a blended media where you've got perlite and other things, because it's just a little bit more uniform and simpler to work with. That said, there are other really good ways to do things. I think the only thing that I would really steer people away from, and I've got some friends that do it, so I'm sorry if you ever end up listening to this, but the like deep water culture or like recirculating kind of constant water recirculation system, I really dislike that, because I think there's a lot better ways to accomplish the nutrition and aeration and everything, and that the benefits are outweighed by how fragile those systems are and how prone to pathogens they are.
Great answer. Across the board, there's a lot of ways to get it done, and ultimately it comes down to what your skill set and your resource availability is across the board.